What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. Let's get one thing straight. China is not here to save Russia. Xi Jinping does not wake up in a cold sweat worried about whether Vladimir Putin will win or lose in Ukraine. What Beijing wants is a Russia that's limping but still breathing, obedient but still standing, and most importantly, a giant nuclear-armed distraction that keeps America occupied. Not because China loves Russia, no way. It's because China loves China, and anything that keeps the US from tightening its grip on Beijing is welcome, even if it comes with a body count. So when Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi tells Europe that China, quote-unquote, cannot accept Russia losing, you should not just picture some dramatic teary-eyed loyalty. Picture instead a mafia boss watching his reckless cousin take the fall to keep the cops off his own back. And even the phrase itself, cannot accept Russia losing. What about wants Russia to win instead? Well, exactly. China does not even want to commit through the statements they make, let alone actual military support. That's a perfect example of a statement which is intentionally vague, so it is open for interpretation to anyone. Meanwhile, North Korea, yes, that same hermit kingdom with nukes, famine and parades of sharp-stepping soldiers, has apparently decided it's time to level up from missile launches into the sea to full-blown boots on the Ukrainian ground. Not for the first time, and obviously not for the last one. But this time, already 30,000 of North Korean troops are reportedly on their way to Russian front lines. That's at least 3 times more than the last deployment, and that's assuming we believe the official statistics. Because why not? Nothing screams strategic genius like betting your regime's future on another dictator's crumbling war effort. So, what do we get? A bizarre alliance of authoritarian burnout states hoping to trade human lives for geopolitical bargaining chips. And as absurd as all this sounds, guys, it is all very real. China wants Russia to bleed, North Korea wants to matter, and Putin, he just wants a win, some kind of win, any win. Even if he has to borrow soldiers from a country where rice is luxury. So let's dig into this glorious train wreck of 21st century tyranny and quote-unquote alliances. Let's start with Wang Yi's theatrical statement about Russia's possible defeat. The "we cannot accept Russia losing" line sounds dramatic until you realize it's just another chess move. What Wang really meant was we would prefer our chaotic, blood-soaked neighbor to keep this mess going just a little bit longer. China is not in this to help Putin, it is in this to help itself. A defeated Russia collapses into a pit of civil war, nukes without supervision, and refugees spilling into Asia. On the other hand, a victorious Russia becomes overconfident, imperial, and maybe even interested in Kazakhstan, which is China's gateway to Central Asia. Neither of those scenarios are very good news to Beijing, obviously. So, what's the best case scenario then? Russia too weak to dream big, but too stubborn to die. Russia that is so knee-deep in Ukrainian mud that it forgets about asking for better energy deals or renegotiating that no-limits friendship. Russia that buys Chinese drones, begs for semiconductors, and says thank you when Beijing purchases its industries at huge discounts. That's the fantasy. A bloody, dependent Russia that makes China look like a responsible superpower by comparison. A Russia that needs China for survival, because nobody else is willing to touch that country with 6-foot pole. And China gives Russia just enough to survive and not revolt. And better yet, keeps American eyes on Europe while Beijing eyes Taiwan. But let's not forget, just a few months ago, internal FSB documents reportedly labeled China as an enemy. Not a rival, not a competitor, a full-blown, espionage-capable enemy trying to steal Russia's tech and eyeing slices of Siberia like it is an all-you-can-eat buffet. I made a video like this a couple of weeks ago. That is the dirty little secret behind the smiles and photo ops. Russia is skeptical about China. China does not trust Russia either, but it will absolutely use it. One country will use it to their advantage, the other because it has absolutely no other choice. So when Beijing says it does not want Russia to lose, what it means is that it wants Putin to keep crawling, preferably towards a direction that never interferes with Chinese ambitions. But China is not the only country that helps Russia. Another one is big involvement is, as you guys know, North Korea. Let's talk about it in the most recent move in our next chapter. If this war was not already absurd enough, enter North Korea. Again. According to Ukrainian intelligence, Kim Chen-in is sending as many as 30,000 soldiers to boost Russia's front lines. That's right, 30,000 more North Koreans, possibly soon to be or already fighting and dying in a war that has nothing to do with them, in a country they have never seen, for a regime that thinks of them as expendable sandbags. But of course, this did not come out of nowhere. North Korea already shipped 11,000 troops last year, everyone knows this obviously, according to at least official reports. 4,000 of them never made it back. 4,000 reportedly by both regimes that would do everything possible to hide the real number. So, yeah, you get where I'm going, you get what I'm saying. But when has mass casualty ever stopped Pyongyang? Those are soldiers who grew up in a nation where starvation is normal and loyalty is mandatory. If Kim says march west, they march, even if that west turns out to be trenched in eastern Ukraine. Why would North Korea even do this? Another question. Because it is broke, isolated, and desperate for leverage. By throwing bodies into Putin's meat grinder, Pyongyang hopes to rack up what analysts are now calling blood debt. The more soldiers it sacrifices, the more it can demand later. Anywhere from military tech to diplomatic favors to even international visibility, a real one. For a regime addicted to being noticed, this is a dream scenario. But let's not pretend this is also a game-changing move. These troops are not elite commandos. They are, as some other experts suggest, state-deployed grunts whose role may be more about showing up on the battlefield, rather than actually trying to change something on the very same battlefield. But 30,000 is still 30,000, pretty big number. Especially when Russia's own mobilization efforts are stalling and conscripts are harder to find than a non-rigged election in Belarus. But then you start thinking, 30,000 is allegedly fewer than Russia's kinda real recruitments of their own per month. So this number is pretty much a drop in the bucket if you think about it, especially on the annual basis. Unless the real number is several times bigger, which it very well might be and most likely is. So, what we have for now is that Russian generals are reportedly training North Koreans on Russian soil, with shared trench systems, translated manuals, and propaganda posters written in Russian or core Russian. And what are they fighting with? According to reports, Russia has launched already at least 80 North Korean ballistic missiles into Ukraine, many of them slamming into mostly civilian areas. That is the price of this partnership. North Korean blood, Russian steel, Ukrainian corpses. Do we even have proof of such redeployments? Well, we do have satellite images showing cargo ships, cargo planes and military camps. That should be more than enough to at least raise some eyebrows and raise the suspicion. Let's briefly go over the evidence in our next chapter. So here we are. The Kremlin's grand plan to sustain its falling war effort now involves turning to countries where human rights are myth and just in general human life is cheap. In addition to North Korean troops, we have seen waves of foreign fighters trickling from Syria, Africa, and now increasingly from within the darkest corners of totalitarian states. This is not a war of national defense, it is a Frankenstein's monster of desperation. The Russian Ministry of Defense is reportedly ready to arm and equip tens of thousands of North Koreans, integrate them into Russian units, and even fly them in using repurposed military aircrafts. Satellite images have already picked up some ships docking in Dunai River ports that previously handled North Korean deployments. Planes were also spotted landing in North Korean Sunan airport, likely to pick up the next wave of expendables. I mean, who else? Definitely not North Korean tourists, right? But let's pause here. Think about the logistics. Russia is now coordinating transcontinental military shipments with a rogue nuclear state. For what? To patch up its bleeding front lines and pretend like it still has momentum. Meanwhile, back home, Russian families are still watching this unfold and wondering why their own sons are still being recruited off the streets, locked into then unbreakable contracts and buried with cheap medals and broken promises. Why do you need such extra double recruiting efforts if everything goes according with the plan? Because everything does according to Putin. That is a very good question to ask if you are in front of Putin, by the way. And it's not just soldiers. Russia is also importing North Korean construction workers, mine clearers, and sappers. Ironically, these people are tasked with restoring the very infrastructure Russian bombs destroyed. It is a full circle war economy experience, outsourced from the world's most repressive states. The war economy that creates its own supply and demand, creates workspaces, then gives people employment in industries which did not even exist 4 years ago. And of course, state-run Russian media is doing its part as well, broadcasting videos of North Koreans training with Russians, cooking with chili peppers in trenches, and holding up motivational slogans up in the air, once again just for the video. It is theater, tragic, absurd and grotesque, but still theater. What all this points to is not strength, but decay. Russia wants Russia to keep bleeding because every drop makes it more dependent. North Korea wants to be owed because that's the only currency it has left. And Putin, he just wants not to lose. How does this alliance sound to you? Strong? Stable? Promising, maybe? But this coalition of autocrats is not winning anything. They're just losing more slowly, together. Let's not pretend there is any ideological bond here. Russia has nukes and land, China has factories and ambition, North Korea has just warm bodies and very little moral principles. They are not allies, they are co-dependents in decline, each trying to stay afloat by grabbing hold of the other sinking ship. Ukraine, meanwhile, stands at the crossroads of all this madness. It is not just fighting Russia, it is fighting the geopolitical rot that allows regimes like this to send tens of thousands of poor, hungry, indoctrinated soldiers into battle, in exchange for vague promises and political IOUs. Every missile from Pyongyang, every volunteer from Siberia, every backroom deal in Beijing is a reminder that Ukraine's war is the world's moral barometer. Who stands where, and who is willing to trade lives for leverage? This is the true story of this war. But there is something else here too, a strange convergence. The same outcome that China wants, a broken, exhausted Russia, is the one the West would not mind either if you think about it. A Russia too weak to invade its neighbors but too stable to collapse into nuclear anarchy. Sounds familiar, right? Wang Yi and Western analysts may not dine at the same table, they might not shake hands publicly or wherever, but they are quietly hoping for the same result, a weak and isolated Kremlin. That's where their unspoken interests perfectly overlap. Well, there you have it, guys. If you haven't done so already, please subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. If you want to support our work and keep us independent news source, you can do it through links down below. For example, Patreon, one of the best ways to do it. Thanks so much for your support, guys, and see you on Tuesday.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway. We do not believe in ridiculous Russian propaganda.